the reason why this has resonated so much with me is, number one, I've been able to do this to the science. I've got a PhD, I've got my credentials, but what I realized very quickly is the medical school dogma that I was raised with didn't compute with a patient that was sitting in front of me desperate for hope.
Welcome to the Fat Emperor podcast. I'm your host, Ivor Cummins. We're supported by the Irish Heart Disease Awareness Charity, which advocates a simple CT scan to reveal your CAC score. So, know your score and take action to prevent that premature heart attack. Everything you need to know will be right here.
I'm here with Robert Cywes, who is an expert in metabolic issues with a particular focus on the addictive nature of modern refined foods. So great to meet you, Robert.
Good, Ivor. Thank you very much for having me here. You're absolutely right. I think I've been in the trenches treating people for about 19 years. And what's become obvious, even though it's not heavily written about, what's become obvious is the group of patients I treat, primarily type 2 diabetics and obese people, have a different use or almost abuse of a particular subset of what they eat than normal people. You know, you and I both enjoy an alcoholic beverage every now and then. We've probably even been drunk in our time. But we don't wake up the next morning with a hangover and start drinking right away. We've got control of that dynamic, even though we've used it and abused it from time to time. In exactly the same way, a lot of people can eat certain food types and overdo it at a certain time, but back off, they can control that relationship. Then we get to people with type 2 diabetes and obesity, and when you interview them and you spend enough time with them, particularly when they are under emotional duress, when they're stressed, when they're upset, when they're depressed, they really don't have effective mechanisms to handle those emotions. And they turn either to alcohol or, in this case, to something that they eat to manage that emotion, to make them feel, to give them a sense of instant gratification, euphoria, tranquility that just obliterates the emotion that they're feeling. And when you look at what people drink, nobody's idiotic enough in the modern world to say that it's all fluids. It's specifically alcohol. Nobody has a rough day and reaches out for the water. We reach out for the alcohol, whether it's whiskey, wine, or beer. When it comes to food, we don't reach for broccoli or steak when we're upset. We reach for a sugar or a starch. And it's typically a carbohydrate, and everybody's got their own poison. My personal one was Coke and M&Ms. Some people love the starches, the rices and the potatoes and the breads, but it's always a carbohydrate. And the reason for that is that carbohydrates affect a particular part of the brain that other foods do not affect. So when you eat a steak, it makes you feel satisfied. But when you eat bread or sugar, M&Ms for me, it gets you high. It affects a different part of the brain, the same part of the brain that alcohol, nicotine, cocaine affects. Now, some people can enjoy that high and maintain control of that. I smoke a cigar every now and then, I have a glass of wine every now and then. I can control that relationship. But once I start to use that substance more and more and more, it becomes so effective at immediately giving me that emotional gratification that I don't need other tools. I don't need other techniques of dealing with those emotions. And progressively, I develop an increased relationship with that substance. That's the first thing. The second thing that happens is, by frequent use, that high we used to get from a small amount becomes less important. So we start eating more and more and more. And it's the chronic excess that causes the problem. Carbohydrates aren't the problem. It's our relationship with them that is. So we don't condemn alcohol, we don't condemn carbohydrates. We have to work with the relationship. And so once people start developing harm from that relationship, let's say you've had 5 DUIs, or you've got liver disease because of your alcoholism, now you've got to start looking at that relationship. If you ignore or distort the reality of the relationship to continue the pleasure of drinking alcohol, you lose control of the relationship, you're an alcoholic. In exactly the same way, when you now start gaining not 5 or 10 pounds, but 50 to 100 pounds, or you start getting type 2 diabetes, you develop sleep apnea, you get polycystic ovarian syndrome, you may not directly correlate that with carbohydrates, but you're still eating more and more and doing less and less other things. You're not doing other things that manage your emotions because the carbohydrates are so ubiquitously available. And if you ignore or distort the reality of the harm to continue the relationship, you've lost control of the relationship. And therefore, to cut back is just not going to work. Because you may only drink 2 beers a day if you're an alcoholic. You may only eat a little bit of chocolate every day if you're a fat person. But when life throws you an emotional curveball, something bad happens, the only resource that you've got to go to is to your drug of choice. And I use the word drug there, not food. And we overeat the carbohydrates, overdrink again. It's only when you remove that substance from your environment so that when you are stressed, when you are upset, when you're bored, when you're depressed, you don't have access to your drug of choice, that you are forced to find an alternative. As long as you've got easy access to your drug of choice, you're always going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And my memory, I used to smoke many, many years ago, and the alcohol, I'd agree, it's analogous, but smoking particularly, you can't have a few cigarettes a week. Now, some people, a doctor I once knew said, some people can flirt with lady nicotine and not get married, but a very small percentage can do it. Overwhelmingly, you can't have them. It's all or nothing. You either make the decision to get away from them and replace them with something else, or you're just a smoker and you're just completely trapped. And if you don't have them for a couple of hours, you're almost panicky. But carbohydrate, the orthodoxy would try and claim that they're not addictive like cigarettes. They have, I think, a list of criteria that the carbohydrates don't meet. But I believe absolutely what you say. I know if I eat meat, it's self-limiting, remarkably satiating. And if I used to have carbohydrates like toast, 2 slices meant 6 or 7 or 8 for me. And I mean 6 or 7 or 8, even at night.
You're absolutely correct, Ivor. I think, first of all, let me correct something you said. It isn't a belief that it's addictive. If you take the word carbohydrate or sugar and starch and you apply it to exactly the same addictive criteria they use for alcohol or nicotine and you just switch the word, it meets every single one of the criteria.
Great, because I had a vague memory that some people maintained it didn't, but I can't remember all the criteria. But it does actually meet all of the actual orthodox criteria.
It meets every single one of the descriptive criteria. It also meets every one of the objective criteria. So when you feed somebody, you do an MRI, a spectrum MRI, and you feed someone cocaine, a particular part of their brain lights up. You feed them nicotine, a particular part of their brain, the same part of the brain lights up. You feed them ice cream, the same part of the brain lights up. And there have been animal studies as well as human studies. And I think that the difference is this. You mentioned this with nicotine. There's both a psychologic dependency, and also because of the nicotine, there's a physiologic dependency, and the two go hand in hand. If you're only smoking every now and then, you may get a lot of emotional reprieve from that. So your brain might have an abusive relationship with it, but because it's intermittent, your body isn't addicted yet. So you can smoke. That's your flirting with but not married to. Having an affair with cigarettes but not condemned to a relationship with them. When it comes to carbohydrates, that same thing may happen. But because they're so ubiquitously available, number one, and number two, we really haven't thought of them as addictive. When you're smoking, you know at the back of your mind that's a problem. But when the world tells us that carbohydrates are not only okay, but they're healthy for us to eat, and I'm talking about some of the things like honey and apples and breads and whole grain breads and that type of thing, quinoa, we actually think we're doing the right thing. The other critical thing is that the carbohydrates are unique in that we start feeding carbohydrates to our children the day they're born. So if you're not breastfeeding a baby, you are feeding them formula. What's formula? It's a baby milkshake. Very low in fat, high in sugar. And then when we wean them onto fruits and vegetables, no meat, so very little saturated fat. And so we create this carbophilic, this person who loves carbohydrates. Whether they become addicted or not, there's a slightly different story to that. But you create this environment where these people, where we now love carbohydrates. And then the question is, to what extent do we depend on them to manage our emotional needs?
Yes, exactly. And you know what you said there is really important, that people perceive them as actually good. Can you imagine a world where we all perceived, and the experts in health said, that cigarettes were good? It would be a disaster. It took enormous efforts for smoking cessation to become a reality, or a reduction in smoking rates. But if everyone and all the doctors said that smoking was good and still said so, we'd obviously have a disaster with smoking.
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. There's a real example. I was in Cuba a few weeks ago, gave a talk out there. And in Cuba, everybody smokes. Literally, the smoking rates are ridiculous. And what the government has said is that our Cuban tobacco is very safe because we don't grow the tobacco with chemicals. So exactly what you've just said, they've created a cultural environment where they condone the use of an addictive substance. And if you fall victim to that propaganda, it's easy to understand that it's okay to smoke. And we've done exactly the same thing with carbohydrates. The food pyramid in this country, we've encouraged people to eat carbohydrates as part of health. And that's where the error happened. We've conned them, it's propaganda.
And that's a killer, Robert. And in Ireland, actually, just last week, we had a senior dietitian on Ireland's main radio station, RTE, and had an 8-minute piece where not only vegetable carbs and non-starchy vegetables were kind of exalted, but bread, pasta, white rice, and basically all the refined carbs were held up as good foods that we should be eating, and that the low carb whole philosophy was damaging by not accessing these healthy foods. That's in 2019, on the main radio channel. It is crazy.
It is actually, but now, Ivor, let's do a simple experiment right now. I'm a doctor. Do you trust me?
Yeah, in principle, yes.
Give me your wrist. You still have a pulse, but you don't eat carbohydrates. If that was true, how could you be alive? And the whole premise is that not only are we alive, I also try not to eat carbohydrates, we're actually thriving. We were talking about that earlier on. So we're thriving mentally and we're thriving biologically. How can that be bad for us, not to eat carbohydrates? And the reality is we absolutely have to have carbohydrates. Without sugar in our bloodstream, we will die. But what most people don't understand is that's the job of the liver. The liver's job is to produce carbohydrates and release them into the bloodstream. That's where my blood sugar comes from. We don't have to put those carbohydrates into our face. Yes, there's an advantage to putting them in our face historically, because we could fatten up a little bit through winter and that kind of thing, but not with the current ubiquitous availability. Then there's something else we didn't talk about. So carbohydrates can be seen both as a food with a survival advantage as well as a highly endorphin activating drug. They fulfill both criteria. Okay? Just like morphine, for example, I use it as a surgeon to alleviate pain. But you may use it recreationally to alleviate mental pain. So we're taking something that is a biologic medicine and we're using it as a drug as well. And that's where carbohydrates fit into a very similar category. The part where carbohydrates become a problem is more and more our society, and I'm talking about the international society, focuses more and more on people being productive and working hard and achieving and success. That's the engine room. The byproduct of hard work, success, achievement is emotional stress. We get anxious, we get stressed, we get depressed, angry, frustration, fear, we feel wounded all the time, and we need a cooling system just to dissipate those emotions. Well, we're so busy working hard, we don't have time to go for a walk or a run, we don't have time to read a book, we don't have time to socialize and kick back. So what we find, particularly when we're stressed out, is something that gives us instant gratification, that instant emotion management, that obliteration of the emotions. And what happens when we have a diverse emotion management deficit, then we turn to one particular substance and we use it to excess. Well, in the last 100 years, this country in America, we went through prohibition because people were using alcohol. Then we went through big tobacco because tobacco was available everywhere. And it wasn't just nicotine, smoking is a lifestyle. And now we're into the carbohydrate lifestyle. Carbophilia abounds. The biggest difference is the majority of people still think it's healthy. Nobody these days can tell me that vaping or nicotine or even alcohol is healthy. And we still speak of carbohydrates as being healthy. And that's a problem. That's a dynamic that needs to change. It's fine to use them from time to time, but at least we have to have boundaries around them. And we don't have boundaries around them. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah, and to the earlier point as well, if they were saying that only non-starchy vegetable carbohydrates were healthy, that would be kind of reasonable, because by their nature, they're not really that addictive. Like you said earlier with the broccoli. I mean, if you're eating non-starchy, above ground veg, you are not going to pig out and over years of eating them become a big fat pig. But they also defend, and this is what really gets me, the rice, the pasta and the breads. I mean, bread, one thing struck me the other day, or actually it was this morning, and I was thinking about your topic and your talk, which was fantastic, and something occurred to me that we all vilify junk food, like burgers and fries. But fries are just refined carbohydrates with vegetable oils. And burgers, there's meat, but there's the bun, which is refined carbohydrate and vegetable oils. But bread, the pan of bread that you buy, the loaf of bread, is refined carbohydrate and vegetable oils. It's essentially the same as the junk food that people like dietitians are happy to vilify, but bread is exalted. But they're essentially the same in terms of their junkiness.
Right, and that's what people don't understand, is that it doesn't matter how it goes in your face. What matters is what enters your bloodstream. And the difference between human beings being more on the carnivorous side and herbivores and other animals is that we use enzymes in our intestine to process what we eat. Gorillas and cows and pigs, herbivores, use fermentation. So they use bacteria to extract the food. When we use enzymes, it doesn't matter what goes in your mouth. Those enzymes will cleave that bread that you eat into glucose. So it's glucose that's entering your bloodstream. Whether you eat it as honey, as ice cream, as sugar, as Taco Bell, it doesn't matter. But the other part is this. You come from Ireland. Ireland has a strong history with potatoes. And potatoes are grown, they're healthy, and they were a large part of the Irish people's survival during very lean times. However, we can now take potatoes and turn them into French fries. We can turn them into mashed potatoes. They're ubiquitously available. We no longer have survival pressure. And that's part of the issue. So there are a number of peasant communities. In fact, every peasant community, post-hunter-gatherer, uses carbohydrates as a staple. But it's an energy survival staple. And that's the difference. What they also still do is they eat their carbohydrates because they're not freely available. They eat them intermittently. So what happens is they'll eat the carbohydrates, they'll store that energy as fat, a little bit as glycogen as fat, and then between meals they'll use that up. So there's this ebb and the flow. The harm only comes when you're eating frequently. I call it intermittent eating, which is the frequent snacking. You know, they tell us now we should eat 6 to 8 times a day. And then you're accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and there's no ebb and flow. Your insulin levels stay up all the time, or they mildly fluctuate. And therein lies the issue. It's not just as simple as carbohydrates. It's the whole pattern of eating. And remember, a snack is always an emotional event. It's never a nutritional event. So if we're snacking for our head, we're consuming beyond what we biologically need. And one of the key things to understand about biology, there is no feedback control when it comes to carbohydrates or alcohol. So if I decide I'm going to drink 10 bottles of beer tonight, I can. There's no way on God's earth I can drink 10 bottles of water. My body won't let me. If I decide I'm going to eat 3 tubs of ice cream, I've actually done this experiment. I have, just for the show. I can. There's no way I can eat a 64-ounce steak. That's the caloric equivalent. I may eat 10, I may eat 20, I may eat 30. My body is going to tell me in a feedback or homeostatic pattern, stop. And I can't eat more.
And even more to that point, your point you made in your talk earlier, if you ate a steak and became full at a certain number of ounces and you said, I have enough, due to the satiety, because the protein, it's sensing systems, you still could afterwards eat a load of French fries or potato chips and chocolate easily after that steak, even though the steak, you were finished, you were full. You're not full when it comes to these things. You could eat a load more M&Ms. You could sit and watch television and eat, I don't know, 800 calories of M&Ms easily.
Absolutely. Well, let me put this out there. When you're at a restaurant and you're drinking water, and you start drinking water and they keep filling it up, are you okay leaving half a glass of water on the table?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Right. When you're in a pub drinking beer, are you okay leaving half a beer on the table? Hell no. And no matter how much beer there is, we will finish that cup. Or if it's Coke. Now in this country, Coke is free, so they not free, but they keep refilling it. But it's very rare that I see people leave half a glass of Coke, even if it's their third one. They'll leave half a glass of water very readily because your body said stop. when we're eating primarily vegetables and meats, particularly high-fat meats, we'll take the rest home as leftovers. When we're eating primarily carbohydrates, we typically finish the plate. And so we eat way more when it comes to carbohydrates. We eat what's in front of us when it's carbohydrates because there is no restriction. In fact, the whole stupidity of what I call the calorie system, and Zoe Harcum loves this discussion, is it was created as a mathematical formula to try to regulate how much we eat because the body can't do that naturally. So we've decided that the human body burns 2,000 calories and that's how much is in our portion. But if you and I both go to a restaurant, I'm a little bit bigger than you, both sideways and lengthways, and we order the same thing, they put the same portion in front of us, and we'll both finish the same if it's carbohydrates. But if it's a 64-ounce steak, we're going to eat what we need, and it'll be different. And that's what the calorie formula was. And then we base everything on this thermodynamic nonsense about how many calories you burn and how much you... It's a bizarre mathematical formula that doesn't work.
Yeah, that is for steam engines. It's just an absurdity to use it for humans. I mean, the complexity of the feedback control loops that worked for millennia now have suddenly broken in the last 40 years. Even exercise levels have not changed that much. They try to blame exercise. One thing that fascinates me with my kids is even meats they like, and they do genuinely like meats or burger meats, it's like you say, it's self-limiting. But when you bring in takeout pizza occasionally as a treat, it is shocking what the same 12-year-old boy can eat. In fact, I'm actually amazed at how much is possible to eat. The control mechanism just isn't there to stop them.
And the control mechanism is not only there when you're sitting down and eating it, but if you eat a steak and you eat some of it and you put the rest in the fridge, an hour later, 2 hours later, you're not going back to the fridge and eating more. But you are when it comes to carbohydrates.
Yeah, if there's a packet of M&Ms in the fridge, you'll be back. And cheating as well. I mean, I'll be honest, occasionally, especially combined, if you have a couple of glasses of wine, there's people around and someone has brought some chocolate as a gift for when they're having dinner at home, there's an enormous drive to reach out because your inhibitions have been lowered by the wine. And once you touch them, even if you're years on low carb and you're good and you're doing great, once you start with a chocolate, it's shocking how many can just drift into your mouth.
Absolutely. And I think that is the quintessential point, the difference between what I call harm reduction models and addiction models.
Just a quick break to remind you that this podcast is only possible due to funding from David Bobbitt and the Irish Heart Disease Awareness Charity. For middle-aged people, it is imperative to find out your heart attack risk by getting a CT scan of the heart and your CAC score. The new IHDA.ie website has all the scan resources. Please support us by visiting and sharing widely. Knowing your score, you can take action to stop the disease process and save your own life. It can even be as simple as removing sugar, refined carbs and seed oils, i.e. processed food, from your diet. And now we return to the conversation.
Harm reduction is eating less so that you don't cause harm. So if you've had 5 DUIs, if you came to me and said, look, I've been to jail, I've had 5 DUIs, and I tell them, look, if you only drank 2 beers a day, you'd be absolutely fine. Okay, and that's true. The problem is by the time you've had 5 DUIs, you've lost control of the relationship. So in a free-living person, to ask them to only drink 2 beers, but they got that case of beer in the house, they may be fine for a while. Life throws an emotional curveball at them, they're drinking more. Exactly the same when it comes to carbohydrates. If you give someone an allowance, you can have 50 grams, you can have 60 grams, then they try to measure that allowance and they may be good for a few days, but then they're going to sneak away and do it, or they're bored or they're stressed and they're eating more. That's harm reduction, and harm reduction is unsustainable because there's no incentive to change the behavior. You may control your calories for a while, but there's no incentive to find other ways to deal with your boredom or your stress or your anxiety. When it comes to addiction management, what you just said, the critical threshold for addiction is the word permission. It doesn't matter how much alcohol the alcoholic drinks. AA will tell you, do not give yourself permission to have the first sip of beer, because you've distorted reality to grant yourself that permission, knowing that you can't stop. When it comes to that first block of chocolate that you were talking about, you have to distort a lot of reality to give yourself permission to do that first block, and then you're screwed. That's one of the reasons, for example, even berries, I don't have them in my house. I'll eat blueberries in my salad at a restaurant, but I won't have them in my house, not because they're not okay to eat from a nutritional perspective, but I'm doing drive-bys. If I know they're in my fridge, I'm going to keep going until they're gone, no matter how big that punnet is. And it's not just how much you eat at one meal, it's that perpetual snacking, because they're in your head. That's how I deal with my angst, with my emotions. And in fact, I don't even feel the emotion. I can't even recognize that I'm anxious or I'm upset or I'm angry or I'm frustrated. All I know is that right now I need my fix.
It's subconscious, yeah. It's just a little, I think Alan Carr with smoking said there was a big monster and a little monster. And the big monster for him was the little psychological subconscious niggle telling you wanted a cigarette. That was the big problem. The physiological addiction to the cigarettes actually was smaller than you think. After 3 days off them, it's faded.
Yeah.
But the huge monster was the belief in your head that this will help, this will make me feel better.
Well, I think the other part also, you're absolutely right. And the other part also, but the other part also is that relationship is so effective that you don't have anything else. So you slice away other ways of doing things. If I've got a tub of ice cream, why the hell should I go for a run or a walk? If I've got dessert, why should I play a game of cards with my wife after, which relaxes me, especially if I win, after dinner? So what happens is this becomes the singular way in which we deal with everything. And so that's the mental side, not just the physiologic side. So when you take it away, when you deprive yourself, now you're left with this huge deficit. What I tell people is when I open an obese person's emotion management toolkit, there's carbohydrates and cobwebs. You take out the carbohydrates, you got nothing. So when you remove carbohydrates, you have to replace that with other forms of emotion management. A lot of people who successfully quit smoking gain weight because they didn't quit smoking. They just went from nicotine to carbohydrates. They did a drug transfer. So we've got to make people cognizant of that. That's a critical part of our program. And remember, what we want to be able to do is create sustainability. It's very easy to go on a ketogenic diet and feel great for a while and use that great feeling for a while. I'm losing a lot of weight. But if all you do is you feel great and you're not working equally hard at developing other things, again, when life throws something at you, you got nothing else. And so people will lose 80, 90 pounds on a ketogenic diet and do great. And then they gain all the weight back. And they don't say, I screwed up. What they do is the diet didn't work. And then off they go and try something else.
But they did stop doing the diet effectively.
Exactly
and
right.
That's the key.
Exactly
and
right.
There actually is, there's a couple of things. One is if you hit a pressure point or whatever, you might reach out, weakness. Another thing is if you're doing really great, you start fooling yourself into thinking you can handle a little bit of carb.
Absolutely.
And then, like the cigarettes, you can handle one in the pub on a Friday, but then it becomes one on a Sunday because I kind of had one on Friday anyway. So on Sunday I say, well, I'll just have one, but I won't have any more.
That's
but
exactly
in
the
3
issue with
weeks,
addiction.
you got a pack in your pocket.
The problem with addiction, and this is my personal experience as well as that with my patients, once you cross that threshold of permission, it's incredibly difficult to step back because we are experts at minimizing and trivializing and rationalizing. And one of the things about addiction, addicts are immune to risk. If I knew that by rolling up my sleeve and injecting some heroin, I had the risk of turning blue and dying, I probably wouldn't do it. But we distort or ignore the reality of the harm because all I want is the hit right now. If I know that this ice cream is going to make me gain weight and become diabetic, I may not do it, but we're immune to that risk. It's like procrastination. Procrastination is about immediate gratification, irrespective of the consequences down the road.
Exactly, because each time you reach out and have the ice cream, that moment in time when you eat the ice cream does not make you diabetic. It's only a sequence. So each one can be excused, and you make the excuse in your head. It's just this one. I'll be better tomorrow. But of course tomorrow comes, it's just another one. I'll be better the next day. And this is the killer with cigarettes, probably alcohol, and indeed with carbohydrates. Let's be honest. I think I recall now, Robert, when I said earlier there's an argument against it being addictive, I remember what it was. It was the argument that nicotine is unnatural or whatever, smoking, alcohol's kind of a poison, but carbohydrates are a food, so you can't call them addictive. I think I remember hearing that logic. I don't agree with it, but...
Right. So, nicotine may be natural, but vaping, a little vape machine, is not. Okay? Even if you take that argument that fruit is not natural. Oh, yes it is. No, the apple that I grew up was a little sour thing like this. Now the apple is this big, it's been genetically engineered, and there's not more vitamins and minerals in there, there's more sugar in there. So we've created that perspective that sugar is now ubiquitously available. And I'm not, sugar can be food, but it's also become a highly addictive drug. So the other element to this is the way in which we raise our children more and more and more. We've gone away from raising our kids the way the original hunter-gatherer clans did, which was they began to raise their kids with a collective way of having fun, of relaxing, and of understanding play as a fundamental part of being a healthy human being. Lovely article from the Eskimos, and it's an interesting article. 1971, a book was written about this, Never in Anger. It's a great book, and it's a long time ago, but around the same time that we were writing books about the ketogenic diet and hunter-gatherer societies. In that book, Eskimos raise their children without the concept of anger. It's not that they teach them how to handle anger. Anger doesn't exist. So if I do something silly, like I drop something on the ground and smashes, and I get angry at myself, now I'm all caught up in the emotion, and I have to subside that emotion before I fix the problem. If I don't feel the anger, and I just pick up the broken thing and say, okay, how do I replace it? I've dealt with the issue rather than the emotion. We so often get trapped in the emotion. You know, when you're driving down the road and some idiot cuts you off, and you get all angry at him, now you've taken his angst and made it yours, and you have to go to McDonald's to get a McFlurry to deal with the emotions. If you just, dude, I'm not going to let your life be my life, and you let him back off, you back off from him, you let him drive away, his emotion doesn't become yours. So a large part of this is how we parent our children. And we as parents more and more are focusing on productivity and less on relaxation methodology. You know, if a young child says, I want to play soccer, what do? We put them on the team. They win, they lose. It's all about the tension of success. It's like a darn math exam. Very rarely do we take them outside or out in the street and kick a ball with them and have fun. You know, it's more important to read to a child than teach them how to read it first. Kid goes to pre-K at the age of 3 and they're teaching them A, B, C, D. That's miserable. But if they fall in love with stories, then they're going to want to read.
Incentivized, really, yeah.
If I have a relationship with God or a spiritual relationship, and it's beneficial to me, and I can share some of my deepest thoughts with that relationship, I bond with that, I can use spirituality. But if my mom drags me off to church and sits me in a pew for 3 hours and I have to listen to some boring, I hate that, and I lose spirituality as part of my emotion management system. So more and more we have reduced the diversity of our emotion management things that we do for pleasure and fun. You know, you and I probably played some sport growing up. I played a lot of rugby growing up. I'm South African. But when I hung up my cleats, what was left? Carbohydrates. So I had diversity, and I gained my weight as an adult. So because I lost all the other things I was doing and was left behind with sugar and starch, and the relationship became excessive. So therein came the problem. So as we look at this, number one, we want to help our, not normal people, not normal skinny people, but our obese and our type 2 diabetics, those that have lost control of their relationship, to understand the addictive nature of the relationship and use addiction methodology, removal and replacement, rather than diet methodology, which is eat less, and have permission to have some, as we said. The second part that we've got to understand is the physiology of satiety, feeling full. And satiety is primarily mediated by fat, saturated fat, which gets into our fat cells, and there's a signal that comes back from those fat cells that says, I'm full. And it's biochemical. It's not based on the load. It's based on that biochemistry that comes back. What did we do 70 years ago when we felt that fat was bad for us? We took fat out of our diet. We removed our satiety signal, and we replaced fat in our diet with sugar and starch. So not only did we remove the satiety signal, we added in something that has no satiety. And you know, how can we not be fat and sick?
Go figure, exactly. And also we replaced natural fats with industrial seed oils, which have been proven in many animal experiments to be inherently obesogenic. So we kind of just double troubled. And the protein has dropped as well in the modern diet. I think America's down at 12 or 14% on average, and there's an element of society there, or satiety there with protein too. So everything has gone the wrong way. Now, I suppose to close on this though, society at the moment and the orthodox experts, shall we say, the so-called experts, they will resist massively this narrative. And they are resisting it. And they are in the vast majority. All the dietetics, dietitians, everyone has the problematic view of things that you described. What do you think in the next few years of our chances of turning this ship around? It's a tough question, but...
I think the reason why this has resonated so much with me is, number one, I've been able to do this to the science. I've got a PhD, I've got my credentials, but what I realized very quickly is the medical school dogma that I was raised with didn't compute with a patient that was sitting in front of me desperate for hope. And when I spoke to and listened to my patient, what I've just said came from being in the trenches. There's not a lot of science about it, as you said, but if you can resonate with your patients and stop using this bogus science and really look at what you're seeing, because most doctors don't see what they see in front of them. And if you can treat the patient at the cause place, because they'll come in and they'll have this emotion management dysfunction, you just talk to them about what they're eating, and they'll, whether they agree with it or deny it, they'll reveal that it's all carbohydrates. That's the starting point. So the part for me that's important is getting into the trenches and being able to treat individual patients rather than looking at peer-reviewed documents that look at large studies. And that's difficult to do because we've become an evidence-based society.
Yeah, EBM has kind of become a problem. It's become a tool of pharma, or the pharmaceutical medical complex, really. But for you to do that with patients is what really helps patients. But I guess you do speak and travel as well. You need to convert more doctors because they're in a very powerful, influential position. And if you convert more, they convert more, the low carb movement converts more, maybe the medical profession can start being the leadership to get these concepts across. I don't know about dietitians so much, even though they currently technically own this space. Right. They're going to be very hard to convert.
Well, I think the dietitians have a specific role, but a cog in the whole thing. They are not the whole thing. Because yes, you want to understand what a healthy diet constitutes. And how can I construct a carbohydrate-free diet? But you also need the psychologist. You need the physician maybe to help you come off your diabetic medications when you don't need them anymore. So you need all of that care. You need the what should I be eating and how should I be behaving? And you need the cheerleader. But our process is more like AA than it is like a diet. Like a diet. And it resonates with our patients. There's also the capacity for relapse. Nobody quit smoking the first time. So you've got to be able to pick them up and move forward. When they screw up a diet, this diet didn't work, I'm going to try a different one. But when you quit smoking, you've got to go through crumpling them up and throwing them away each time. You've got to help the patients with their success as well as their relapses. And I think you're absolutely right. I do a lot of speaking. This kind of thing that we're doing right now, I'm not here to convince people with science. All I'm asking people to do, and I say people, not even just doctors, anybody, lay people, dietitians, psychologists, doctors, open your eyes. Look at what's sitting in front of you and open your ears. Listen to what they're telling you. And when you listen, this becomes so obvious. And that for me is the key thing. You can ignore the science a little bit and just watch what's in front of you. And then even if you don't believe me, what I tell my patients is this: try it. Try it for 21 days. Nothing bad is going to happen if you stop eating carbohydrates for 21 days. And most people can manage 3 weeks. Try it for 3 weeks, let's reconvene. And almost always, and nobody's going to get it right completely, but always a moderate reduction in carbohydrates makes a massive difference. And they'll come back and they say, wow, I love the way I feel, but I'm a little bit more stressed, I'm feeling great. And then we can have the emotional talk.
Well,
but you've got to do it progressively, exactly right. Yeah. Because we're so busy eating, we're not even in contact with our emotions.
We're not connecting our emotions and our subconscious to what we're eating. They're almost separate, like completely. That's food I eat, and my other problems are my other problems.
Correct.
Most people are not connecting them into a kind of an integrated whole problem.
But once people see that they're actually self-medicating with eating and drinking,
the penny drops.
And then the penny drops, and then they start to see. Now, the next question is, do they want to change?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So the way I look at carbohydrates, and it's a nasty, but I believe a very relevant way of talking about it. Let's say two people fall in love, and the one person is incredibly wealthy, incredibly good looking, great in bed, great conversationalist, and the other person, the other spouse says, well, this guy's providing everything for me. I don't need to work anymore. I love talking with him, so I'm not going to meet with my family anymore, give up my job, I'm going to move into the house with him. And this person represents everything wonderful to them. And they're in great territory. They felt better than they've ever felt before. And then what comes along is one day, that guy comes along and hits them, gives them a black eye. Well, it was my fault. I kind of, the food on the table was cold or whatever. And long story short, every couple of days they're getting beaten up, a broken arm here, welts on their back there. Eventually they come to a point where they say, you know what? I love this person terribly. I have nothing else in my life. All the other things I've sliced away because he represents so much. But he's beating the crap out of me. I've got a choice to make. I got nothing except this person. Do I get a restraining order and move out? And I'm going to be miserable and because I got nothing? Or do I say, I don't care if he kills me. I love him so much I'm going to stay. And the patients I see in my office, the morbidly obese people, the diabetics, are in that relationship. They love carbohydrates. They're so ubiquitously available. Plus, they're now fat. There's so many things they can't do. So they're in this tight little prison with their obesity. They love their carbohydrates, but they're beating the crap out of them. And the question you have to ask is, am I willing to step out of that relationship? And when I do, I've got nothing. But slowly you can rebuild that relationship. Some people choose to, some people don't. And domestic violence often ends in death because somebody didn't choose to move away, as does your relationship with carbohydrates.
And you know what? It's going to be tough as well, because someone carrying a couple of 100 pounds extra, when they do give up, which is their only hope, but when they do give up, they have such a long road ahead. And I don't mean to be negative to people who have to take that journey. I respect them so much for the ones who can go through the long journey of taking away all those pounds, keep away from the thing that was their primary succor and help and comfort, and keep with it until they get the benefits and then get traction and realize, wow, I'm free.
And I think you're absolutely right. But the way I look at it and the way I explain it to my patients is, when you look at how prevalent carbohydrates in your relationship with in your life, it's like an elephant. Oh my God, it's an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? You can't eat in one bite. You break it up into little pieces. And if you focus on little changes that you make every day or every few days, you slowly advance through this. Your obesity didn't come in a day. Let's give up the sodas, the sugary stuff. Then let's give up the breads and the pastas. Then maybe let's work on some of the snacks. And then let's work on the fruit. And if you do it sequentially like that, and you bring in higher fat foods, you bring in some of the foods that give you that satiety and that satisfaction, it's removal and replacement, but you can do it progressively. All too often a diet is, here's your start date, do it all. You can't eat the elephant in one go.
And replacement is so important. I mean, like with the cigarettes, replace it with something pleasurable. You don't usually do something that might be expensive, but you do it for the period to get you through the initial stage of the war. But just back to taking the chocolates, what I do to avoid that is I get a plate of cheese cubes. I always keep good cheeses in the fridge, which I like brie and camembert, nice cheeses I like. Or French sausage, the expensive stuff, the saucisson, the dried sausage, stuff that really is a treat, but it gives you something to have alternative to the temptation to take the bad thing. You've got, like you said, you've got something else. It's not just you or the chocolate or just you with nothing.
You're absolutely
There's
right.
Something else.
Yep. And I've coined a phrase for that. Because when you need that little snack, as I said, a snack is always an emotional event. But it's really, I'm feeling something, I need something to alleviate this emotion. A snack gets you over that, but it causes caloric harm. A bridge, which is the word I've called, a bridge helps you to cross that thing without causing harm. So your little thing, that piece of cheese, I have some sugar-free Jell-O in the fridge, I have my coffee. Those are the things I've developed a very close bond, a relationship with. So when I have that moment, I've got easy access to my coffee. I've got easy access to these things, so I don't go foraging for something else. If instead of having cigarettes in your pocket, you've got a stick of gum in your pocket, you're going to reach for that when you have that moment. That's your bridge across the need to have a cigarette without causing harm. One of the other interesting things, if you've got a bit of time, is that the human brain can focus for around 20 to 30 minutes at any one time, and then it will take a break. You're either in the driver's seat or the passenger seat of that break. When I go for my coffee at that break, I'm doing something that's helping me just have that mind-cleansing moment that doesn't cause me harm. If I reach for my Coke and my M&Ms like I used to, I'm having that mind-cleansing moment, but it's causing me harm. And a cigarette here, a cigarette there, by the end of the day, it's 20. A couple of sips of Coke here, a couple of sips of Coke there, it's a case of Coke at the end of the day. So it's the cumulative effect. Is my coffee perfect? No, but it's a hell of a lot better than the carbohydrates I was eating.
Bridges, actually.
Bridges.
Bridges are so important. Well, you know, I think not only have we gone through this whole topic pretty comprehensively within our limited time, but also there's quite a few tips in there towards the end. But you can't give a comprehensive kind of course for someone to bring them through it. But that's what you do with your one-on-one patients in Florida, isn't it?
Yes, and it's sequential, so it's not just one visit. We introduce it and then we talk about different topics. So there's information that we provide first, and then we help the patients to manage their lives uniquely. And it's a team approach.
It's essentially a program, and of course it must be, because there's no one-hit wonder. Like the BS diets out there are, you just get the list and you do it, it's a fad. You have to carry people, because these people are severely compromised, as you've described. So they do need some support and a lot of pointers and feedback and kind of, you know, rounds of getting through it all. You know,
very few people quit drinking. Very few alcoholics quit drinking on the internet. And a lot of people are doing what I call internet keto. They're following somebody who's an evangelical keto person, but they don't understand what they're doing. My practice is not a weight loss practice. It's AA for fat people. And we follow that stepwise addiction methodology. And really what we help them to do is guide them and navigate them through the pitfalls. Keto evangelism, particularly when it happens on the internet, you're trying to learn by yourself, but there's no self-recognition. You don't have that introspective ability, especially to understand your behavior when you're doing a keto diet on the internet. But when you approach it from a substance abuse perspective and you have that introspection and connect it to how you feel, and we can help you to connect that, that makes all the logical sense and creates not just weight loss, but sustainability, which is really what we're after.
Which is crucial, because 95% of diets fail in the long term. Keto may be better, of course, than the stupid diets, the low-fat diets, but the failure rate is still going to be substantial unless people are supported. And the most vulnerable people, you know, we're talking about the people with a lot of weight, with diabetic issues, with psychological challenges that they use carb to compensate for. Those people, more than anyone, need support and help, which it sounds like you guys are absolutely doing for them.
And I think this type of discussion does that as well. It opens your eyes to other possibilities, and you think about things beyond just carbohydrates, calories, and diet. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Delighted, Robert. Yeah, perspective is what it's all about.
Thank you.
We get the message out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my subscribe button in the middle of the screen, a free viewing of the Widowmaker movie on the far right, and myself and Dr. Gerber's book, Eat Rich, Live Long, on the left. Otherwise, please do subscribe to the audio podcast. Thanks.